This is one of my favorite rabbit holes to go down because it always pops in my mind. But you know, like the Pixar film Cars, the franchise.
Oh yeah, the Cars franchise, the Glorious Cars franchise.
Yeah, the Glorious Cars franchise. Like the thing is, it's kind of funny with like all the Pixar films and how, you know, they sort of live up to the idea of just being sort of this like child's imagination. Well, with Cars, it's just like there's a lot of questions that are not necessarily like answered in the film. Like one of my favorite ones is like, if there is a car pope, does that mean there is a car Jesus?
There was a car crucifixion.
Car crucifixion. How does that work? You know, I mean, impound a lot. Does Pontius Pilate a bulldozer? Like,
well, can we talk about how in the Cars universe they also have the TSA? So that implies that there were terrorist hijackings in the Cars universe. So yeah. By the way, this is all from Cars 2, which is the worst Pixar film. So I just don't think that's canon. I just think about Cars 1 and 3, which are, well, Cars 3 is good. Cars 1 is fine. So
I consider Mater's Tall Tales to be canon, but I was watching this like funny video today. It's like, you know, how like Mater sort of like talks about like, you know, these weird stories, and this guy was just like, you know, like Mater's like talking about like Cars D-Day or something, and it's like Mater, we were not even in Cars World War II, and then Mater's like, how would you know? You was there too, and it's like you're missing a tire, and you left it on the beaches of Normandy.
there was a meme for Mater's Tall Tales. I think it was someone said sub caption, Lightning McQueen has dementia because he just doesn't remember all of these little side quests.
Oh man,
yeah, that franchise is going to be 20 years old this year.
20 years old.
20 years old, yeah. I think that was the first movie I saw in theaters.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, no, that's not true. But it was one of the earliest ones. So
yeah, it was like big fond memory for me. Anyway, welcome to Cinema Boulevard. I'm Daniel McGregor Hoyer.
I'm Matthew Ha. What a way to start the episode talking about the logistics of the Cars universe.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I don't know. It's one of my favorite rabbit holes. Oh yeah, one of my favorite rabbit holes to like jump into, because I just love the questions like the film doesn't answer at all, or even like the franchise. I mean, it's funny. It's a funny rabbit hole. But regardless, by the time this episode comes out, we're about 3 weeks removed from the 98th Academy Awards.
So I don't know who's really going to necessarily care about the news on this because it's been so late, but you know, we have to talk about it. We're a film podcast. So. Oh
yeah, for sure. And I think, you know, it's definitely interesting, how there is even discourse with this whole ceremony. And then a week later, it's like, you know, nobody's talking about this discourse anymore, but I just find it interesting about like, you know, internet reactions to the awards given out. But, you know, it's, you know, the Academy Awards, we watch it every year, whether we love it or not. You know, as flawed as a organization the Academy is, I mean, the thing I do appreciate is that they do bring attention to films that do warrant that attention. Oddly enough, I did not watch the ceremony live. I was actually on a film shoot, so I was not able to watch it live. I actually ended up like recording it and watched it that way. And did you watch it live or?
I did watch it live. I watched it with some friends. We had a good time. We played some games and we did our own ballots. And it's always part of the fun of the Oscars too, is that you get to experience it with friends. And depending on how into your friends are into the Oscars, they really go all in and making it fun. So the gathering I went to, they made some snacks that were all themed to some of the films that were nominated, including some snubs. No other choice. Sorry, got a bit of a cold. But yeah, so it's also just a good excuse to gather, and for us film bros, or we're not film bros. Edit that out.
No, we're definitely not film bros.
Yeah, please edit that out. Yeah, for us film lovers, this is our Super Bowl, is how I would best describe it. So yeah, and it was a decent ceremony. I think last year's was better. This is the second year Conan hosted, and we could probably get more into this, but Conan as a host definitely brings some different life to it. Although I will say some of his material was not as great compared to last year. But what an excellent way to start off the ceremony with the weapons reenactment. That was absolutely fantastic.
It was awesome.
Yeah, cutting in through all the nominees and even getting, I assume it was Sony Animation, to animate a sequence of him as Aunt Gladys in the K-pop Demon Hunters universe. That was a lot of fun. And if we're talking about the winners too, as someone who follows the race, none of them, well, majority of them didn't surprise me. There were a few surprises in some categories that I guess it was a bit hard to predict, even though there was one that it was basically a 50-50 chance. And if we want to just go into it right now, Best Actor.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, Best Actor. Yeah, that was one of the bigger upsets of the night. So I mean, obviously, it's making our first episode look a little more dated in comparison because, initially Timothée Chalamet was the big front runner for that category. And Michael B. Jordan, got the SAG, and then on Oscar night, he took the Best Actor Oscar. And, I mean, it's well-deserved. I mean, I actually not mad he won it. But I guess it's just sort of interesting on how Marty Supreme sort of just faltered its whole campaign. And people like to point to the dumb ballet and opera stuff that was from 2019, which, people do forget, once those videos resurfaced, awards voting was already closed.
It was done, yeah.
Yeah, so it's people were like, oh, the reason Timothy lost his Oscar is because he said this about the ballet and opera community. And I do sort of like how not like the backlash, but I love how I believe it was the Metropolitan Opera House or something, where they had a discount, a 44% discount with the code Chalamet.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's oh man, it's a hilarious backlash, but it's just such a pointless backlash. But that didn't affect the awards at all. It
was a very pointless backlash, and also I was surprised with how up in arms a lot of people got over that. And I'm not gonna. It's old news at this point, but I just remember thinking, why is this the thing that people are really, really offended by? I don't know if offended is even necessarily too strong of a word, but it just seemed. I found it very curious that this was as much of a talking point as it was for quite a bit, and to the point where they were making jokes about it within the actual ceremony too, which, they do that all the time. Some people were reading also into it, I think, a bit too much, where in the performance for I Lied to You from Sinners near the end, there was a ballerina. I don't remember her name, but I guess she's very... Yes, so she apparently came out retirement. People were reading in oh, this was meant to show Timothy, ballet is a real art. And I'm just thinking these things take a while to rehearse and plan, so this is probably coincidental, honestly. And the fact that some people are saying oh, it was directed towards him, I think that's a bit of a reach.
There's a lot of,
but yeah, and I think, but once Michael B. Jordan won the SAG, it was really anyone's game at that point, because if I'm not mistaken, he's the only one Michael B. Jordan to win the Oscar after only winning SAG, because he didn't win anything else in terms of major awards.
Yeah, because
and there was no front runner, basically.
Yeah, and it's interesting how heated these races got, because I think everybody was sort of on edge. And I know we talked about Best Actor first, but I think it was also the Best Picture too. where once Sinners got the SAG for Best Cast, like people were thinking, oh, it's gonna pull, it's gonna pull a Moonlight, it's gonna upset the front runner. It never did.
Nope.
Which just kind of showed how much of a stranglehold like One Battle had the film industry on during this award season, and that doesn't necessarily mean like Sinners was the worst film. I think Paul Thomas Anderson sort of pointed out in his speech, like, there's like not necessarily a best picture in some way. Because I think when you get down to it, like, and yeah, there's a lot of like people that were, very anti F1 when it got the nomination. But, initially this was like a very good list of Best Picture nominees. This is probably like the first year where actually a lot of these nominees were like in my top 20, top 25 of the year.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
There's not really a weak film, I would say.
Yeah.
In the lineup this year.
Yeah, very much so. And I was very impressed with how PTA sort of like handled like that whole thing. And then of course, like, our favorite world, film Twitter, had some like reactions over One Battle winning, including like spreading around the clip of Sean Penn's character saying, he loves black women, and just trying to say it in a way where it's just like, oh, it's clear that, they're trying to villainize people and stuff. And it's like, you're taking stuff out of context and you're just upset that your film didn't win, which, it's a great film. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But it's like discourse that just didn't, it's discourse that, it's one through one year out the other. So.
Yeah. And no slouch on Sinners either, because that won 4 Oscars. That was the second most wins of the night, and in pretty major categories too. So it had a fair run, I would say. Definitely. I would say I'm actually in the camp where I was pretty happy that Sean Penn won, and he had the best strategy out of anyone this year, where he just stood back, stayed quiet, didn't do any press. He didn't even attend the Oscars, which I know some people were upset about, but he didn't show up and he won somehow.
Yeah, he was in Ukraine.
Yeah,
he was in Ukraine. Yeah. So
maybe Timothy should take notes. Just don't say anything during the award season, then you might win. So
yeah, for sure. No, I'm actually like not really upset that Penn won. I know there's people that aren't necessarily big fans of Sean Penn. And I can understand that. I mean, the guy does come off a little bit, of an asshole sometimes, but it's a great performance. I think, it was like probably my favorite of the year. I mean, people were thinking that he was pretty dead in the water at the beginning of award season, because Benicio del Toro was getting all the critics' love, and Stellan Skarsgård and Jacob Elordi were getting a lot of appreciation as well. And Penn just sort of just grabbed it and took it after like the BAFTAs and the SAG awards, and never looks back. And I don't know. I mean, does he truly come off as someone that probably cares? Like, probably not. I mean, he's made his comments on the Academy pretty clear, but it is like probably like the most memorable performance out of the 5 nominees, which is saying something, because all the nominees were great. I mean, for that category, I mean, I think they were all just like really deserving. And yeah, could be the last time we might not see Stellan Skarsgård or Dory Lindo get that type of appreciation. Hopefully they will at some point. But it's still, it's definitely a deserving performance. So very happy with that. Although, like, I could understand people not liking that he wasn't there, but it's clear that he went to Ukraine to help with humanitarian efforts. Which I guess it kind of makes Kieran Culkin's whole response come off pretty dated as a result. So, but it is what it is.
I mean, yeah, unfortunately with that, it was more just he was just he wasn't informed. So I don't know what else he would do in that situation. So I don't really blame him. There's one thing, we're talking about stuff that was good. I want to talk about something that was not good, and I'm actually very upset about and extremely disappointed and disheartened, was the lack of respect given towards people either finishing or starting their speeches, and particularly for the K-pop Demon Hunters Best Original Song win, which that was one of the most offensive things I've ever seen, was them cutting off the one songwriter who was about to start reading the speech. He had a piece of paper in his hand. He didn't even bother letting him talk. Like, what is that?
I guess, like, the show was already running over because, since I did DVR it, I got to kind of, be able to skim through like all the mindless ads or whatever. And I was sort of just like, yeah, they clearly cut them off too early because they're probably crunching for time, but they probably just, it's not a secret that they do this. Like, they've been doing this ever since, like, the awards have been broadcasted on television. Like, they've always been cutting off winners earlier because, they can't go over their aforementioned time slot, which they do every year.
Every year, yeah.
Yeah, because
you might as well buy more ad space at that point.
Yeah, which,
like, honestly.
Yeah, and it's like also like, you're sort of interfering with the 10 o'clock news, which, a lot of people still watch. But, so it's like they're obviously crunching for time. And I think it's going to be, very interesting once they hit YouTube, where they're going to probably not have that issue in about 2 years from now. So I guess like it's to hope they don't run into that incident the next time, because obviously the next time is going to be the last time they're going to probably run into that incident. Hopefully. But yeah, that was a very not a good move.
Not to pull this card too, but it also really doesn't help that they did that to a person of Korean descent, so a minority, and it doesn't look good on their part. And the best thing is that during the press interviews after the ceremony, bless whoever this was, there was a journalist who actually asked him, "Oh, can you please say your speech?" And his speech was only 30 seconds long or something. It wasn't even a minute. Like, to the Academy, God forbid you spare an extra 30 seconds to let this man speak. But no, I guess we have to make way for the 10-minute Bridesmaids dialogue. For the 15th anniversary, which I've never seen Bridesmaids, but I was thinking, like, why is this bit is going on very, very long?
Yeah. That definitely dragged. And then like the whole Hemsworth and Downey Jr. Avengers anniversary thing went on for a little long, although I do like the punchline at the end about Channing Tatum, needing his like, Speedo back or something. That was sort of funny, but it, there's a lot of times where it just kind of felt like it dragged on a little bit.
We have that every year. So it wasn't painful though. I will say that most of the stuff that wasn't necessarily funny was not painful, unlike in previous years, but it was just some where they could have cut around it. They could have condensed it. And a lot was dedicated towards ad space, like the Mandalorian and Grogu bit, which, I mean, that was a little crass, but, it's Disney, it's ABC, so.
Yeah. It's, they gotta squeeze those things in. I mean, that's why it's like, the 14th anniversary of the Avengers, and it's like, I forget this is owned by Disney sometimes.
Which I don't even think was nominated for an Oscar, by the way. So.
The Avengers?
I don't think it was.
Best visual effects.
Oh, was it? Oh,
yeah.
Never mind.
I've been watching the Academy Awards like probably for the last, I wouldn't say 20 years. I've been watching it since Jackman hosted, which was like 2008.
Wow.
Yeah, so a long time. And, this is kind of where, we're going to go back to Conan for a little bit, then we'll talk a little bit more about the rest of the ceremony. Obviously for not too long, of course. But Conan's sort of like has been a breath of fresh air as a host for the past like 2 Academy Awards. And yeah, his material here is not the strongest as it was in the earlier ceremony, but I believe you said this, he just has a really good stage presence. And the thing about being a host at the Academy Awards, and I think Seth MacFarlane said it after he hosted in 2012, is that it's probably one of the most stressful experiences for a comedian, because the Academy has puts everything on such a high pedestal that obviously you've got to be a little bit classy, but obviously not too still have your level of humor. Which is why Billy Crystal worked for so many years, because people loved Billy Crystal because his whole personality just fit in with what the Academy was going for. And you could probably say the same thing about Bob Hope, although I wasn't alive to witness Bob Hope. But I watched a lot of Billy Crystal's monologues from the past award ceremonies he hosted, and he's hilarious. But I would say many of the hosts were just either not funny or just just don't fit. I think that's Jimmy Kimmel was such a safe pick for a while, because he's typically relatively safe as a comedian, although his he does a lot of Trump jokes and stuff, but for the most part it's pretty safe.
Yeah, him presenting, I think it was documentary, further reminded me of wow, you are not a good host, and I don't understand why you were entrusted with this position for such a long time. Because the thing about Conan is that even though his material wasn't great, he has such a good presence and is able to deliver material very well and effectively that it makes not great material seem a bit better. You could tell he's passionate, and he's goofy, and he knows how to be funny, but he's also, you could tell he respects it. There was that one point when, I think it was during the short film which, not to get off on another tangent, but this is the first tie that we had at the Oscars in almost 15 years for the live action short film. There was one point where it was going on a bit too long and the camera cut to Conan, and he was clearly it was not meant to cut back to him. And he just he played it off, and he played it off pretty well. And you could tell he's probably thinking, how do I steer this ship back? But it comes up, he plays it off in a natural way. And you obviously recognize that he does care about movies. He does care about this ceremony and how it is an honor to host it. And when you have that energy in the host, the overall experience is better. Whereas with Jimmy Kimmel, it's a contractual obligation. I don't want to sound mean, but I don't know how much he cares about films, to tell you the truth. But it just doesn't seem like he really wanted to be there. It was more just, I have to because I'm part of the ABC umbrella, so I got to be here. That was the attitude that came off, and that's why he wasn't good.
The only funny bit from Kimmel's, whole Oscars thing, and people like to point to how he handled the whole La La Land Moonlight debacle, which he handled that pretty well, all things considered.
I think that was his first year.
Yeah, it was first year. His first year is probably his best year, but the funniest thing I think came from Kimmel as a host was the whole Matt Damon original score bit, where if you guys don't watch Jimmy Kimmel, there's an ongoing thing he has with Matt Damon where sorry, we're cut short. So apologies for Matt and Damon, but we're cut short on time. We'll be here next week. And, it's always a joke that, he always cuts off Matt Damon, and Matt Damon sort of plays into it. And, whenever he does any promotional campaign for a film, Matt Damon always comes on and just belittles Kimmel so much. But that's the part of it of his hosting gig that was funny, because he kept playing off Matt Damon and making fun of the fact that he was in We Bought a Zoo. That's the only funny part that Jimmy Kimmel's ever done. But the thing about Conan is Conan, and I think it's definitely what makes it different from a lot of the other comedians, is that Conan's not afraid to make himself the butt of a joke.
Exactly. Yeah.
He makes fun of himself. That's the best part about Conan. And, he's also a very genuine person. It was sort of hard not to feel bad for him. And he was talking about Robin Michelle Reiner, who, passed away this past year. And, you could tell because obviously he was in a situation where he was at a party with them the night before they passed away. So you could tell he has a genuine interest and, genuine passion for filmmaking and people. And I think that's what makes him really well as a host. So, but
yeah,
but like
I honestly hope he continues hosting. I just wish that he had better stuff to work with, but well,
yeah, you know what it is. So, but yeah, I mean, yeah, from a ceremony standpoint, I think it just kind of felt a little slower this year, but I think like the race itself was very tense. For the most part.
Yeah.
So
yeah, once we got to the actual ceremony, it was pretty, for most of the categories, it was pretty obvious who was going to win. There were some where it could have gone either way, particularly with actor, and even for international film, it was really up in the air, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I really liked that Ho Chim Trier won Best Foreign Language Film for Sentimental Value. I recently watched the rest of the Alzo trilogy after we watched The Worst Person in the World last episode. And yeah, this guy's deserving of it. I was very happy to see that he walked away with an Oscar. And of course, having the cast of Sentimental Value behind him was an excellent moment in the ceremony. Very, very well done there. So yeah, it was very awesome to see that. I was very happy, and seeing Coogler win an Oscar was great too. And yeah, I mean, for the most part, like I wasn't really mad about many of the films that won. I think they were all pretty deserving. I know people like to point out like F1 winning Best Sound, and it's like they just awarded it to the movie that's very, very loud. But
which they always do. So
yeah, the one year they didn't was Zone of Interest over Oppenheimer. But I don't know. I think it's good sound design, so I wasn't really mad about it. And yeah, I mean, I think a lot of happy to see Amy Madigan win for Weapons. That was great. Great moment.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Yeah, that film technically swept, but it was only nominated for one. So
yeah, Warner Brothers had a good ceremony. Like they did. Sinners, One Bad Afternoon, and Weapons, like all combined, 11 Oscars for the night. Like that is probably the most by a studio, and I'm not sure how long, but it was a good ceremony for Warner Brothers. So very, very happy for
maybe a sign to further embrace theatrical distribution. So,
are you listening, David Ellison?
Yeah, seriously. Anything else? Anything else to add about the Oscars?
Nah, nothing really. I mean, I think the discourse was very stupid, but that's with any award show, really.
As it always is.
Yeah, but I'm happy Sinners got awards. I'm happy One Battle After Another got awards. I think that's like the second time in the past 10 years, or my favorite film of the year won Best Picture. The other one being Oppenheimer. So yeah, I was very impressed. Very, very impressed. Happy to see PTA get his Oscar finally. That was amazing.
Yeah, he won 3 Oscars.
3, yeah,
for the same film.
He went on a Sean Baker Linsanity run. We love it. So, but all right. So with that being said, we'll jump into the most recent blockbuster of the year that came out with huge critical praise. I think this wasn't expected when this film released its trailers, but it's looking like a big hit. It's looking like it's loved, and that is Project Hail Mary, directed by Phil Lord and Chris Miller of 21 Jump Street fame, and of course the producers of the Spider-Verse films. People think they directed him. No, they produced it. There's a difference. So this is technically their 6th directorial feature film. And it stars Ryan Gosling. He plays an astronaut or a scientist, for lack of a better word, who goes up to space to try to find sort of like, you know, the cure for humanity in some sense. Like, it's a lot of science knowledge. It's of course based off of a book by the same guy who wrote The Martian. Yeah, it's becoming a pretty big deal. I wasn't expecting that. I mean, were you?
Yeah. No, not really. And not to say that I didn't. It sounds like I had no faith in the project, but that's not true, because I remember seeing the trailer thinking like, oh, this looks like it'll be good, because Phil Lord and Chris Miller, you actually forgot one of the films they made. They directed the Lego Movie, which is probably one of the best animated movies ever. And
for sure.
It was based on a novel by Andy Weir, who wrote The Martian, and likewise it was written by Drew Goddard, who also wrote the Martian film. So this had a lot riding on it in terms of it being potentially very great, but for something about the trailers, like, I guess I wasn't necessarily expecting it to be like super critically acclaimed, but then when the reviews were coming out and just the hype, it was really something, which we don't really see from a non-IP film. This is an adaptation, but it's not connected to an intellectual property or franchise, which is refreshing. And overall, I guess to go into thoughts, I enjoyed the film. I thought it was good. A part of me wishes it was a little more seriously toned, because when it starts off and what I like about this film is that it almost feels like Interstellar, where the emphasis on the science is in the realm of like possibility, because the whole thing of why they want to go on this mission is because the sun is dying, so they need to get this microorganism basically to protect Earth essentially from dying out. And given everything that's been going on with climate change and stuff, there are some interesting parallels. And with all the dialogue and all the different characters, it's like, okay, this seems logical and sensible, which I like. And then once Ryan Gosling is in space, he ends up encountering, it's not really a spoiler because it's in the trailer, he ends up encountering an alien on this rock alien. And then from there, the film takes on a more lighthearted tone into more of a buddy film, which is not, I guess you wouldn't necessarily expect that, but then the film just sort of becomes a bit more jokey, it becomes a bit more humorous. And it's not like the dialogue or the jokes are bad, but it almost goes against what I thought they established really well in the beginning, which is, it's almost like Interstellar levels of emphasizing the science. And then there were some points where a lot of that tension just kind of felt deflated at points, but it's not to say the film doesn't work, because if there is a saving grace to the experience is the fact that this is, as a science fiction film, from a cinematography, a visual effects, and a production design standpoint, this is a 10 out of 10. It's insanely beautiful what they managed to accomplish from a visual experience level. This was cinematographer was Greg Fraser, who did the Dune films, and unfortunately he's not going to do Dune 3, but he knows how to communicate scale and size within an intergalactic setting. And this was also, it wasn't shot on film, but it was released in the 1.3:1 aspect ratio and had a 70 millimeter release. And this is possibly one of the strongest uses of the format that I've seen in a while. All the space scenes are 1.3 or 1.43:1. And to communicate that scale visually was so impressive to see. And nothing looks fake either. There's a lot of emphasis on the practical effects, the production design, the model work. There's some shots that sounds crazy. It reminded me of 2001: A Space Odyssey in terms of the composition and the lighting and the way they capture space with the sound. It's phenomenal from a visual effects department. And if I'll be honest, unless another film comes out that further impresses me, this might already be a lock for best visual effects for next year's Oscars. So yeah, that really saved it. And I do like the film. I don't know if I would say I would love it like a lot of other people do, but I had a good time watching it.
I sort of went into Project Hail Mary with like I wouldn't say like high expectations. I mean, I sort of just went in with a little bit more of an open mind just because it's like, okay, that trailer did not look great, but there's a lot of people that are seeming to love it coming out of the theater. So it's like I just sort of went in with a big open mind. I got the IMAX 70 millimeter screening. And the funniest
Oh,
thing is
nice.
like, so the theater I went to go to, I don't know if you had this experience, but theater I go to is like the Webb Chapel in Dallas. It's like a giant Cinemark. I think it's like one of the very few Cinemarks in the state that has an IMAX theater, oddly enough. Because mainly it's AMC, but this one's like the only one that has a 70 millimeter IMAX screen anyway. But it's always like before the film starts, there's this like guy that always comes out explaining like not the film you're about to watch, but the way you're gonna watch it, and he brings out like 70 millimeter film to sort of explain like what it is and like how big it is, and it's like it's always impressive and he does it just to obviously be sure people can go and get in their seats before the movie starts. But it's like always interesting to hear. I actually got a 70 millimeter IMAX print, not of the film. I got it of Robots, the Blue Sky
Nice.
film. So but yeah, it's always like an interesting part about seeing 70 millimeter films down here. Just because that guy is always very entertaining when he explains like the fact that you're going to be seeing this film in a very special format. And so, but anyway, so I get into the film and it's like I'm enjoying it. Like I actually didn't mind the humor too much, although like there were times where it could be a little bit unneeded. And yeah, I'm really enjoying it. It looks great. Greg Fraser is probably one of my favorite cinematographers working today. So this just looks incredible. The visual effects are just outstanding. The practical sets feel realistic, and I really enjoyed how they made the rock alien, or as he's called, Rocky, in the film. And I really enjoyed a huge chunk of that. And, I also like how there's like a good switch in aspect ratio too, from like, the scenes in space where, like you said, the 1.431 aspect ratio, while the other is just in, the normal aspect ratio you would see in a standard format. So really good use of that. So I was like enjoying it. Loving the cinematography. Gosling's performance is great. I mean, Gosling's probably one of my favorite actors working today, just because he has a sense of stoicism that, oddly enough, portrays a lot of good emotion, but also has a lot of charm to it. He's a very charming actor. I'm one of the bigger defenders of his performance in First Man, because I think that's where his stoicism sort of used the best, in my opinion. Hot take. But so I'm enjoying it. I'm really enjoying it. But after a while, I really start to drift away from the whole experience. And I think it's just because the story it's not a badly told story. I think the structure of kind of cut back and forth from the space scenes to the Earth scenes feels a little like it sort of like drops the momentum a bit for me. And well, I could understand why we need those scenes. They need to develop Gosling's character. They're there for a reason. It sort of felt like it was halting the momentum of what was going on as of now. And that's sort of what does kill the film for me a little bit. And then I felt like the film really got a little long in the tooth near as it was trying to reach its ending. Because it kind of felt like points where it hits its natural end, but then it just keeps going. And it's just like, I know this is like a 2 hour and 36-minute film, and I've seen longer films than this. I mean, One Battle After Another is longer than this. Barry Lyndon's longer than this. Like, there's a lot of films that are much longer than this that I didn't really mind the pace for. But here it just like, it sort of felt like the film is trying to find its satisfying ending, but it's also trying to throw curveballs at you in the process. So I kind of felt like Drew Goddard's script was trying to handle a lot and really trying to tie up all those loose ends, where I felt like there could have been parts of it where it could have felt ambiguous, or where it could have felt, much more natural to the story, which isn't to say the story isn't natural, but it just felt like the film kept going on forever. It's still great. I mean, it's still really good, but I just think it just sort of dragged on for a little bit too much for my taste. But, it's still an amazingly well-made film. So.
Yeah, I echo a lot of the similar criticisms that you have. I actually like the structure of the film, how it's told non-chronologically, where the movie starts, Ryan Gosling wakes up after being in a coma, and all like his team, they're dead basically. So, and he has no memory of how he even got to space. So we're in that confusing headspace with them. And then as we cut back and forth, it's slowly adding more pieces to this puzzle, which that works. I like that idea quite a lot, actually. But I agree with you that for the story it's telling, it was quite long. And particularly there's two things that bother me about the structure. One of them is more spoilers, so I won't get into it now. But once Rocky is introduced, there are a lot of scenes that I feel like are just repeating and communicating the same idea. He befriends the alien. They communicate. At first, they don't know how to communicate. Oh, we can use the technology to translate your speech. There's a bunch of scenes, and it's a bit more comical. And then Rocky comes onto the ship, and it's building more on top of that with the buddy, I guess, sort of routine. But that's also what I said earlier about how it sort of deflates the tension. It feels like a completely different movie, which I think there could have been a better way to sort of balance the tone, because it's been a while since I've seen The Martian, but that film is also, for the most part, fairly serious, but there is some good wit to the script, particularly with the dialogue. Like I remember it's more subtle. Like there's little things where I remember Matt Damon, when he grows the potatoes and he runs out of ketchup, so he puts some like powder on it as like a ketchup substitute, and then he says in the log, "Yeah, it's been like 30 days since I ran out of ketchup." Like that's cute, and it doesn't feel that out of place with the tone of the film. Whereas here we start off where Ryan Gosling is alone, has no idea how to fly the ship, his team is dead. It's a pretty dark scene, and then at the same time he's like screaming when the zero gravity comes off, and I don't know, it's just the balance of it didn't really work as well, because for Lord and Miller, at least, they primarily work in comedy, but they haven't really done dramas. So maybe that is where the issue lies in terms of the direction. But that is probably the best way that I could to sum up why I didn't really think the tone necessarily worked all that well. In a way, kind of like the Oscar ceremony, the jokes weren't painful. They weren't bad jokes. There was actually a lot of good laughs, but it felt a bit inconsistent with the narrative it wanted to tell. But yeah, and with the second part with the structure, I actually think where it has three false endings, basically. It wants to be more triumphant, but then it reveals like a dark secret, and then it still wants to have a happy ending, sort of. And I almost wish it ended before we had a more happy ending, because then it would have been a sequel structure in terms of starting and ending at a very low point, and then it makes the whole film all the more almost like a tragedy, basically. It's this tragic story of loneliness at the cost of all this technology, sort of. And I guess, what is the purpose of space travel when the people behind it are sort of, I guess, well, I'm trying to like dance around it, but the motivations. Yeah, it's incredibly, it can be very apathetic. I think that almost would have been like a Kubrick type ending, where it's just so bleak where it ends up. But then where the film actually ends was more, it was cute. It was a cute ending, but it felt like it was a little tacked on, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess like in a sense, it's like I could understand what they're trying to do. They're sort of trying to create much more of a optimistic version of Interstellar in some respects, because, obviously, like, Interstellar is very dramatic, and it's Chris Nolan's style of filmmaking, and Lord and Miller's is like you said, background in comedy, and And obviously, like, yeah, they produced the Spider-Verse films, and those films sort of like have a little bit of a lot of dramatic weight to many of the characters and scenes in those movies, but there's always like a sense of like uplifting optimism. So it seems like they're sort of grabbing what they did in Spider-Verse and trying to implement it into something like this. Which makes a lot of sense because, this type of idea could be like a very fun, optimistic, feeling idea. So I don't really have much against like the tone in that, but I think it's just like it's where it wants to bring it. And I kind of felt like it really could have hit its satisfaction earlier and left some ambiguity, which obviously will jump into spoilers, but just want to talk about a few more things first. But I still think the film does well with that tone, but it just like at some points it just kind of felt like it was sloppily getting to that finish line. But regardless, like, I think everything else just works very well. I mean, like I said about Gosling before, it's like, like I said, he's probably one of my favorite actors working right now. I don't think I've ever seen an actor like Gosling where he could jump into like roles that are, upbeat and a little comedic, and obviously like, big celebrity heartthrob in some way, but also could be really dramatic in a lot of cases. And there's a lot of like good films that use him very well. Like, Half Nelson is a good role. Of course, what is it? It's the one he did with Steve Carell. That's like The
Big Short.
Oh, it's not The Big Short. It's like a rom-com. Emma Stone was in it.
He did. Crazy Stupid Love.
Oh yeah, Crazy Stupid Love. Like, yeah, that's a film that uses Gosling perfectly, and of course you get Drive and All God Forgives, and a lot of really good Gosling performances that are more action type, but sort of lean into the stoicism that he has as an actor. And I love him in Blade Runner 2049 too. Like, that's obviously one of my all-time favorites. And La La Land, of course, and Barbie. And it's like, yeah, there's a lot of good performances for Gosling out there, and I just really enjoy him as an actor. Just because like that stoicism really works, and he has enough charm and charisma to carry a film on his own. And because when you think about it, it's really just him in the majority of these scenes. It's definitely a really, really gripping performance that, the emotionality is there, and then the humor is there too. So it's a really good performance to latch on to if you're a moviegoer. And, he's so likable too. And you really understand like his whole struggle and, why he sort of feels this way. It's a really good performance. People are even saying Oscar worthy, oddly enough, which I wouldn't be mad if like they try that.
I mean, yeah, the Martian was a big Oscar-nominated film, from what I remember. He got a bunch of awards. I think Matt Damon also was nominated. But yeah, Ryan Gosling is really, really good in this. I think he does an excellent job. And particularly what you said about how most of the film, at least in space, he's the only one pretty much, or the only human interacting. And he plays that off very believably. Like, I believe that he's in this situation. He's also lost and confused. There were some points, though, when there's still a lot to his character that I feel goes a bit unexplained, that sort of made me... I wish I knew a little more about him. They sort of dance around one idea where I think it was Rocky asked, like, oh, do you have a mate back home? And then he was like, oh, yeah, there was the one girl, but it didn't really work out. And that... It's like, oh, that's interesting, because even on Earth, he doesn't really seem to have a lot of friends all that much. He's just a middle school science teacher. His students really like him, but we don't get a sense of what he's really like, I guess. And there's some details like that where maybe it sort of hints why when he's up in space and in this situation, he handles the loneliness a lot better than maybe someone else would. But he's not a boring character, but there's some details that I wish were further explored. I do really like the side characters too. I thought Sandra Hüller also did a really great job. Particularly, there's one scene that a lot of people are talking about when it's right about when they're going to launch the spacecraft, and she sings karaoke. And that was a really good scene.
Yeah, the Harry Styles song.
Yes, yeah.
It's a really good cast. It's not a big cast, but it's a really good cast. I mean, I think, but obviously this film is Gosling's. It's nice to see that he's in a vehicle where, you know, he's holding a film by himself like this, especially a film that is on this big of a scale. And he does
budget.
Yeah, huge budget. I think it says it's like a 248 million gross budget. So definitely,
I believe that.
Yeah, definitely. And you also got to figure like the film has to make like probably 400 million, 500 million to break even. But regardless, you know, the fact that, you know, you're having one of the biggest movie stars like currently holding a film like this all by himself is really impressive. And yeah, and of course you can't like forget about James Ortiz as Rocky, who does like both the voice and the puppetry on him. Like he wasn't just a puppeteer, but he had like team of 5 of them that were controlling this this model, which looks realistic. That looks great. I mean, you actually get a lot of emotion out of a character that doesn't have eyes. We were talking about this earlier with the new dumb Moana trailer. But yeah, it's like, yeah, it's a lot of emotionality with this character, and he does, and it's all through his actions. It's all through his actions and the way, I especially like the voice that they give him, at least translating this character. And yeah, it's funny. Like, it actually works well with the relationship with Gosling, who is like, you know, for the most part, like, yeah, his character is so alienated and, you know, alone and sort of content with being alone. You know, it sort of creates like a nice dynamic between the two. Because there's a lot of really good scenes between both of them. And so the film really hinges on the chemistry between Gosling, who, you know, of course, is like the only like lone actor in the room outside of Rocky. So like, you know, the fact that we're able to believe that Gosling and this rock creature are best friends, it's amazing. Like, really amazing on how the film manages to make this all work.
It's nice to see a $250 million movie where you could actually see the money on the screen, especially with the visual effects and the creature effects too, especially with Rocky, where it's a physical puppet, and that's all the more better than a CG design when there's actually something tangible in front of the screen that the actor can interact with. And it does help that a lot of the voice actor also did a great job too with communicating the emotion without even a face. It kind of reminded me of R2-D2 a little bit in some instances. And yeah, I do like that. There's not necessarily a lot of action, I guess, in the film. There is a phenomenal action scene when they have to gather the astrophage from the planet, and that was really cool. But even something as simple as something I like about the film is the emphasis on problem solving. All the characters have to think intelligently on how to get from point A to point B, whether it be on Earth or in space. And one of the best scenes is when the alien, I guess the mothership of Rocky's homeworld, tries to deliver the message to Ryan Gosling on the Hail Mary ship, and they sort of throw something at him. He's like, oh wait, I gotta go out there and actually like grab it, and then they connect the two ships together. But like, oh wait, the zero gravity is on. How am I gonna walk around? Oh, I'll turn the centrifuge on. That way I can remain on the ground. Like, there's a lot of those scenes that I find really satisfying in the film. And I know some people said those go on a bit too long, but I think it's important to establish that, yeah, these people are scientists, they're astronauts, they're physicists, they are very smart and intelligent. And so when we put them in situations where they have to solve these problems, they have to think outside the box, it makes it all more believable for, I guess, our investment in them as in terms of their title and their career. So you buy even someone like Ryan Gosling, who's like, okay, I buy that this guy is a scientist. I buy that Sandra Hüller is also a scientist trying to figure out these problems. So, yeah.
Yeah, also like big shout out to Lionel Boyce as Carl, the security guard. He was actually pretty like humorous in this film too. Like I said, it's a good cast. Like it's a really strong cast, even if it's just like a film that only purely hinges on Gosling's performance. But yeah, it's really impressive, like on how there's such believability with all what's going on in this film. It is sort of taking a lot of notes from what Ridley Scott did with The Martian, which according to the Golden Globes that year, it was the best comedy of the year.
I mean, there was some comedy in it, but I wouldn't say it was a comedy.
Yeah,
it's like how people say The Bear is a comedy.
It's like, yeah. I don't know. I think if the Bear is seen as a comedy, it's like we're all having anxiety attacks while laughing, I guess. But, it is taking a lot from The Martian. But it is, but you could tell like that, it's a little bit of a different story and sort of about this loneliness that, where is somebody content with like, being alone. It's like because deep down it is a very, very sad story. I haven't read the book, but I can get the gist about what they're saying here about loneliness in a lot of ways, and it is understandable. It is very understandable in how they sort of portray it. So there was really nothing like that. I was actually pretty happy with how they handled the majority of the themes in this film.
Yeah, thematically, there's nothing really wrong with that. So it's more the tone is what I got held up on. Like a lot of it surrounding it is very, very good. So
as of now, we're going to be going into spoiler talk. So feel free to skip to the next time code. And if you haven't seen Project Hail Mary, unless you just really want to hear us talk about spoilers. So 3, 2, 1. So I honestly think the film should have ended at the point where Gosling and Rocky sort of reunite, where you sort of learn about this ugly truth with Gosling's character in this film, where he was sort of forced to go. Like they're big science guys, like, died suddenly. So they were like, we got to send him up to space because, it's our last hope. He doesn't want to go to space, but then Sandra Hüller's character is like, yeah, you're going to go still. And so like, they chase him down, they drug him, and then he's automatically up in space. So that's how we sort of get there. And I actually did not mind that twist, but I wish the film, like honestly, the film should have just ended at the point where, Gosling's like, like, I'll just send this all back to Earth and, I'm just going to reunite with my best pet rock friend here. And, and so he does that. And, that's nice to actually hear Two of Us by the Beatles play in the background. Really, probably one of my personal favorite songs from them. But regardless, the moment where, they're both reunited, I think that's where the film should have just cut. And then it just sort of kept going. And it's like, oh, we got to see how, Sandra Hüller's character felt about like the fact that like, oh, it's nice that he got a best pet rock friend. And then it's like, I don't know, it's like at some point the film really just should have ended. Because I kind of wanted some ambiguity. I wanted some ambiguity, like, oh, does he actually go back to Earth? Does he not go back to Earth? And they try to keep that ambiguity there at the end as well. But I just, I was kind of already satisfied with what I was seeing. Like, I was already satisfied with, like, okay, yeah, just, like, what reason does he have to go back to Earth? They sort of treated him like shit at the end of the day. But I don't know, like, they just really wanted to go on with the rest of this narrative for another 10, 15 minutes. And it's just like, at some point, like, the film has to hit its end, and I felt like it hit its end naturally there. I wouldn't have minded if it hit its end there, but it just really dragged on, like really dragged it on.
Yeah, the last 30 minutes does drag the most. And regarding the twist, I like the twist, and I thought it was actually a good surprise, and ultimately, kind of what I said to earlier, it really upped the tragedy of the story where, okay, he was forced on here against his will, and you understand why. I guess this also kind of went to my issue with how Ryan Gosling's character wasn't as super developed, is that he's very hesitant, and you could chalk it up to him just being like nervous or unqualified, but there's something else where he's trying to say something or get something off of his chest that they don't really address, and I didn't really understand why, because it almost, without the context, it sort of makes him out to be a little more selfish than I think the film intended, because obviously he's put in a tough situation. It's either he goes up into space to save humanity, or else if he doesn't, like 30% of the world's population gets wiped away, but he never gets to experience life. So I understand, I empathize with that, but his hesitancy and his lack of him sort of being vague, I just don't understand like why he's so up about that. And I didn't really understand. So him being forced on the ship is, I thought if it ended there, that would have made the whole thing really that would have been a really much of a downer of an ending. And I agree, once he reunites with Rocky, it's like, okay, then if it just cut to black, that would have been an interesting ending. But then it reveals, oh wait, there's still a bit more. And I guess spoilers for the book too, because I never read the book, but a friend of mine informed me about this. Where the film ends is also where the book ends. And I think my friend said something along the lines of the last page was all the rock hands go up. The last line has something with rock in the title. So you don't know, like they're building him up to be like, oh, he's just teaching back on Earth, but no, he's teaching to the other Rockies. But in the film, if there was one issue with having all the space scenes being in 1.43 to 1, by the time we get to that point in the film where it's been 2.5 hours, I'm already accustomed to, okay, any full frame IMAX scenes are space scenes. The first shot of him waking up in the new house with all the new tech is full screen IMAX. And I'm like, oh, he's not on Earth. He isn't on Earth. He's still in space. And so I got to the ending before the film did, which was that was the one time where the IMAX, the use of the IMAX wasn't the best, but it's a very minor nitpick. But also I'll chalk it up to, it's hard to communicate that in film when it's a visual medium, whereas on a book page, you can be a bit more descriptive and sort of build up to a sort of a surprise ending like that. So I feel similarly with how just, first of all, slow the ending was, and where it ended it wasn't unsatisfying, but it could have been more, I guess, intellectually stimulating, to not sound pretentious, but yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, I could get, I guess like with that book ending, it's like, guess that's where, Goddard sort of interpreted the script and sort of like, oh, like we could just have them go back to the planet and like, oh, discover like, his rock family or whatever. I'm now sounding like the Flintstones here. But yeah, we love our rocks. It's not a boulder, it's a rock. Good SpongeBob humor. Regardless, if they really wanted to like have that part there, it could have been, maybe they see another ship come by with the rock people or whatever, or the rock aliens, or what they call the Edians or whatever. It's very, I just know them as rock.
Yeah, I just call them the Rockies. So
anyway, I just felt like that, they could have found a way to just like get to that ending, but I felt like it was already hitting that satisfying end and earlier, and so I felt like the film going on for much longer, like really, like I just start to really, really tune out. So I guess I don't mind that the twist is there. I just, I kind of felt like it was very smart in some respects to even have that twist there. But I just didn't really feel like it. I felt like it just could have ended much sooner because I think the film pretty much accomplished what it wanted to do at that point. So yeah, we don't need the epilogue. I mean, it could be an extra bonus feature, but that's just sort of my critique. It's like, I just sort of felt like it could have ended just a little earlier because it already hit that satisfaction.
It also would have, I guess, something that I felt would have been stronger if they didn't have the sort of post-epilogue of him going back to, or showing him teaching the Rockies, is that if you were to rewatch the film with the context in mind of him being forced onto the mission, it really, another thing that's tragic is that, like, one, everyone back on Earth is so old, but also once he regains his memories, how's he gonna react when he lands back on Earth? If he sees the other people that forced him onto the ship, like, how is that gonna affect him emotionally and mentally? Like, at that point, he might as well just remain in space because there's really nothing for him on Earth. He doesn't have a significant other. I think they even mentioned he doesn't really have any family that's alive either. We don't see him with other friends also, so his real friend is Rocky. So that makes sense for it to end and be like, okay, the film could be explained to the audience, you're smart enough, you can fill in the blanks of what happens to Ryan Gosling and Rocky. But then the extra thing at the end sort of just like, it was very cut and dry, and I wish the film didn't do that if that's the case, because this film isn't for children. This film is meant for I don't even know if older audiences is really the right term, because it's not an adult movie, but it's also, I wouldn't say it's for 6-year-olds, but it felt like it dumbed it down a little bit.
Yeah. So. And, I think it's reasonable that, they want this to appeal to a major majority, because I know, like, when Interstellar came out, like, there were a lot of people that were just, like, really confused because Nolan included so much of the real science in the film that, like, people were just sort of just like, I don't know if I really truly understood it. And, because, yeah, it's a whole bunch of, like, sci-fi, like, mumble jumbo. And, like, they actually brought on, like, Kip Thorne, a guy who is really well known in, like, the field of, like, quantum mechanics,
NASA.
And stuff like that. So, I mean, obviously, it's science that is beyond me. I mean, I couldn't tell you the science of Interstellar. That's why there's guys like Kip Thorne who know better than I do. But obviously, over time, like, Interstellar managed to get its audience, even like the modern audiences for that matter, who probably didn't understand the science the same way I did. But I think it still resonated enough that it was able to work. So, not to say that this film needs to be like Interstellar. I mean, obviously, different interpretations, different types of stories, different types of tones. I mean, I don't know. Could you see Nolan doing Project Hail Mary in the optimistic lens that Lord and Miller are doing it? Probably not. They'll probably be a little bit more cross-cutting in Hans Zimmer or Ludwig Göransson. But, you would never see that. Well, my point is here, audiences have obviously gotten smarter since Interstellar, where, the blanks and the ambiguity of Interstellar, people could fill in very easily now compared to 2013. So I think they could have honestly left a lot of things ambiguous, especially if Gosling ever decided to go back to Earth. And I kind of like the idea that, he feels very satisfied with the fact that he didn't go back to Earth. He did his mission. He secured his fate, and he just decides, like, I feel better up here. I'm content with being alone up here. I'm content with being with my rock family, my family of rocks, and I'm satisfied. So I felt like that, So I felt like there could have been some ambiguity there, because I feel like not everything needed to be spelled out.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. This film in general feels, it's interesting compared to Interstellar, because there are a lot of similarities in terms of the science, but it's handled in such a different way, which I guess to echo what you said about audiences, maybe this is just a sign of how audiences are watching films, because there's all those reports of people watching, like Netflix in particular, they're writing shows now so that you could, I guess, multitask, like scroll through TikTok and you could still get the gist of the show, hence why characters explain the same things over and over again. I don't know if this is a victim of a change in audiences, but even The Martian doesn't really explain all that. They keep some stuff vague and left open pretty, like, obviously spoilers, he goes back to Earth, but like we knew that was going to happen from the start. But even then, it doesn't show like the process of him, touching down on the Earth and talking to the reporters as if he was part of the Apollo space mission. Like, no, it allows you to fill in those gaps on your own. And in this case with Project Hail Mary, it's almost like I almost saw it as if Spielberg made Interstellar in 1987 or something. It has that vibe and tone throughout. And even still, I think even Spielberg at that point probably would have been a little slightly more ambiguous with some of the details too. Cause like even in like E.T., they leave some stuff open and it's not as clear cut a film. So
yeah. And it's like, I think it's okay to be bittersweet. Like, I think obviously like Gosling's other film, La La Land, was that way. So it's okay to be bittersweet. It's okay to like, still like have that ambiguity there. Like, does he actually make his way back? And I guess like in a case, it's like, I want it to be just a little more ambiguous and not quite as clear cut. Because, and to me, that's where a film can resonate a lot more. That's why, Blade Runner resonates with me so much. That's why La La Land resonates with me so much. That's why Blue Velvet resonates with me so much, because, there is some ambiguity there, regardless of like, whether or not the script is giving you clear answers. And I think that's sort of the case where, Lord and Miller, obviously, it's been a long time since they've done a live action film. Like, their last one was 22 Jump Street, and that was all the way in 2015. Like, it's been a long time. And, obviously they've been busy. I'm glad that they're very big names in the animation industry and that they're, doing their damnedest to like promote like, deserving salaries for animators and, equal pay, and being sure that, they're not being used as like sweatshop workers, which is great. I'm very happy about that. Obviously there was a lot of controversy with, Across the Spider-Verse, where, some animators said that they were really pushed really hard during production because they were tight on deadlines. So there were some points where Across the Spider-Verse felt very unfinished. Which, I think that hopefully that's a lesson they learned. But, the fact that this is their first live action film in like almost 10, 11 years is pretty insane. And I think it's a case where, maybe they're still trying to get that footing back. But regardless, I think they still did a pretty exceptional job with this film, even if it like didn't necessarily stick the landing that it hoped it did, but I think it sticked the landing enough. So I'm pretty satisfied with what they did.
Yeah, and when you factor in that their last live action film was 22 Jump Street, which is a pretty standard comedy, going from that to a $250 million space action epic is quite impressive. That they were able to rein it in and actually communicate the ideas pretty prominently. Obviously, like what you said, it's not they've been making stuff since 2015 or 2014, whenever their last project was, but they still have the sauce, basically, is what I'm trying to say. It doesn't feel sloppy. It doesn't feel mismanaged. Like they clearly have an idea of what they're doing. So
yeah, very, very much so. They're probably looking to get that footing back at some point. I think they got another film on the docket. It's called Artemis. It sounds like it's another space film. I don't know what it's about. But yeah, I'm glad that it's directed by them in some way, because they are very creative, and especially with like how they direct many of the scenes in this film. And especially, we didn't talk about it, but probably my favorite scene in the film is when they're so Gosling is outside his spaceship, and you're looking at the planet, and it's like a very like translucent green background, so looking like something out of like a lot of those those French, like those very past like French 1940s films with like the very colorful backgrounds. I think it's like The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, I think was one of them. And it's a very gorgeous looking background, but then once like he's starting to gather like all the astrophage or whatever it is, and then like it switches to like this very red like bokeh type grain. It's like, my God, that is probably one of the best sequences I've seen in like any modern sci-fi film. Like, and because it felt like very 2001-ish in that way, but it's very atmospheric. It's a good use of like the film look, even though like, yeah, this wasn't shot on film, but the 70 millimeter look on it, just, oh my God, it's just so great. Like that is a great sequence there.
That's one where you really see like, okay, this is really showing off the potential of visual science fiction storytelling that it seems like a lot of sci-fi films just haven't really accomplished. Like it was this, maybe because I saw Interstellar semi recently that was just a lot on my mind a lot, but this really felt the closest to Interstellar for a sci-fi film in quite a while, because even though we've had films like Blade Runner 2049 and Dune in the sci-fi realm, those are going for very different vibes in the realm of almost fantasy or future or like cyberpunk. Whereas here it's still grounded enough, but still evokes the spectacle of cinema and science fiction that is more visually pleasing. So.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Any other thoughts?
I don't think so. I liked it, and I understand why a lot of people are really, really into it. It's a good crowd pleaser, and I am really happy to see that this film did a lot better in terms of financial success than I think many people were expecting. You hear that, Variety? But yeah, no, I'm glad I saw it, and I'd recommend if you get the chance to see it in an IMAX theater in particular, because the emotional effect really is carried forth in IMAX, and this is one where they clearly had in mind how they wanted to frame and shoot the film with that format in mind. They didn't just like slap it on and just randomly change the aspect ratio like Mercy did, where they just didn't care. But yeah, Project Hail Mary, good movie. I wish it was a little more subtle. I wish it was a little more serious, but still liked what it did. I give it a 7 out of 10.
Yeah, I mean, I have my issues with the film clearly, but I don't know, I still can't bring myself to like, hate it. I think it's still really, really good film. Probably one of the best like sci-fi films we've seen in recent years. And yeah, of course we have Dune, which, everybody's really excited for Dune Part 3, of course. But I still think like, this is a spectacle that is meant to be seen on the biggest screen possible, just because it just invokes cinema to me. It invokes like that feeling of, going to this movie. I think I saw like a dad bring like his kids to this film. I think they were like probably like not 6, but they were probably like around 10 to 12 years old or whatever. And I think like the kids, I wasn't like watching, I'm not that way. But whenever I was turning, stretching my neck or whatever, the reactions were just very like that's sort of the magic of movies in some way. I think there was something that composer Brian Tyler said on just like documentary called Score, where sometimes he would like walk out of the theater unknowingly and just like be near the front, just watching people's reactions to the film itself and just seeing how they're moved by it, whether it's just the music or the visuals. And it's nice to see those type of reactions in the theater. Even if I didn't even if I wasn't totally on board with what the film was doing, I still think it was amazingly shot, amazingly acted by Gosling. It looks great from a visual effects standpoint. And yeah, I mean, it's ambitious. It's a really ambitious undertaking for Phil Lord and Chris Miller, especially for their first film in over a decade. So yeah, I'm very impressed with it. 7 out of 10 is probably where I put it. It could go up to an 8. It may not, but I think 7's kind of where I feel very, very satisfied. All right, so my rec now.
You're
my rec. Yes, there's only 2 films I'm going to talk about today. But so initially, my rec was a last minute decision. Because I didn't make a decision before the next episode. So it's like, just had to skim a faded movie poster to find what I wanted to talk about. And it just ended up being the most, predictable choice. And that is Orson Welles' Citizen Kane, 1941. I mean, do we even need to mention the reputation of this film at all? Considered to be one of the greatest films of all time by the American Film Institute. It's talked about endlessly in film circles. It's talked about a lot. It has a lot of history behind it. For those who don't know, Citizen Kane is Orson Welles. It's his directorial debut. And he gathered a lot of the cast in this film are from the Mercury Productions radio station because, he was a big voice on radio at the time. Hollywood tried to bring in Orson Welles a little earlier, but he wasn't a big fan of the system, which, is very, very admirable when you think about the rest of his career in some respects. But, he decided that he wanted to direct Citizen Kane. And, that's where he met Herman Mankiewicz, who decided to base it off of William Randolph Hearst, who was a big newspaper mogul at the time. And the reason he wrote it is because, Hearst, kicked him out of his social circle. So he just sort of decided to make a character piece that was not a very flattering inspiration of Hearst, even to the point where Hearst, made this film purposely bomb by, committing a bunch of defamation and libel suits about it. Which, we were at a point now in journalism, we don't have to worry about that. But yeah, so this film has a lot initially, a lot of influence, a lot of legacy, a lot of history. And, people are sick of hearing about Citizen Kane being considered the greatest film of all time. And my question is, and you could be the one to try to answer this, Matthew, does it live up to that reputation?
So I think it's best to, when talking about Citizen Kane, one thing that inevitably gets brought up is its status as one of the greatest films of all time. And I say one of because it is currently not considered the greatest by Sight and Sound. It was for, 40 years or something, maybe even longer. It held that title for a while, but in 2012, Vertigo dethroned it. And then in the 2022 Sight and Sound poll, it got dethroned by Jean Dielman. And I think when talking about Citizen Kane, the concept of the film canon always comes up. And what I've always wondered was, do I like Citizen Kane just because there is this preconceived notion that is considered the greatest film ever? Does that influence my opinion on it at all? If it didn't have that title, would I still think it's a great film? And I've seen the film quite a few times at this point. And I think also one thing that I would like to hear from you too is, when did you first see the film? What was your experience like with this? So was it in film school or was it just on your own?
I was on my own. Actually, I grew up a film nerd. way before college. Like I was in middle school at the time. And, it's also kind of the time when I got really into the Academy Awards. So it's like, I really started to get into film history, get into, everything about filmmaking. And, AFI and, seeing like the AFI like specials and stuff like that growing up too. And Citizen Kane was like frequently cited as like one of the greatest films ever made. And so I like watched it for the first time, and obviously like it lives up to its reputation from then. And so and it's like it's a great film, and certainly definitely one of the greatest films of all time. But as I grew, my taste sort of changed in some respects, and a lot of that is due to a lot of the films that came out in recent years. Of course, like, Fantasia is still up there as my all-time favorite, but of course you get your La La Lands, you get your Blade Runner 2049s, your Hers. It's like, there's a lot of films that have come out since then that, I started to love more and more. So Citizen Kane just sort of, came by the wayside a little bit because, obviously I'm from a generation that didn't grow up, with the idea that Citizen Kane was like the greatest film of all time. Although like, I watched all the specials and, it's like, middle school brain me was thinking that way. But once I progressed from high school to college, I really started to, get into, other types of film. And, even more into international features for that matter. So I guess like, watching it last week, it's like, it is still a great film. Like, I think it's certainly in the list of like my top 25 favorites per se. Don't think it's like my all-time favorite, but it's really hard not to be impressed with this film as a whole, even with all the influence it has in film history and all the influences it has like across like pop culture for that matter. It's really, really hard to dislike this film. And the reason why it works so well is just the fact that Orson Welles is so dedicated to the craft and is probably using it at its most, like using it to the nth degree that probably was never seen at the time before. And you could see so much of modern filmmaking using the approach that Orson Welles is using here. And it lives up to that expectation. And the thing is, you can't discredit Mankiewicz either, which, for a while there used to be like a whole authorship controversy about who actually wrote the script for the film, which, they eventually just decided to give it to both Mankiewicz and Welles. But Mankiewicz's own personal story with Randolph Hearst shines through a lot here. And just the way this whole thing is structured is like, it's damn near perfect. Like it's insane. Like the level of filmmaking that Citizen Kane is still bringing to film today, especially in the States.
Yeah. So in a similar experience, I did watch this film. I think it was in high school for the first time. And Citizen Kane had the aura of, oh, this is the greatest film ever. So I watched it with that context, but not really knowing much of the history because I was into film, but also this was before I took film classes. So I remember watching it for the first time and I was extremely impressed. I really enjoyed it, but it wasn't until I started, I watched it for like 4 separate classes throughout high school, undergrad, and grad school. And every single time, just knowing the context of when Citizen Kane came out and also just the sense of control that Orson Welles had over this film at a young age. He was only 25 when he made this, which is pretty phenomenal. You really sense that, okay, this is why this film developed such a reputation, is because of how ahead of its time it was in terms of communicating this grand story of Charles Foster Kane. And it's grounded in this sense of realism, but it really is playing with the film form when it comes to the cinematography, the structure, and even down to the performances too. There's nothing about the film that feels phony or fake. You sense that Wells and if we want to get more into, I know that the auteur theory is a highly debated topic in film school and film scholarship, but this is the prime example of how to describe the auteur theory. Orson Welles is the director. He produced it. He's the star. He co-wrote it. I know there's the whole authorship controversy too, but he is heavily involved in every department that you sense this is his baby, basically. And when you compare it to other films of the time too, in the 1940s, just this film sticks out like right away, like right from the beginning of the opening scene where we're introduced to the Kane estate, the panning shot of the gate establishing this massive palatial estate, just the mood and the atmosphere is unbelievable. And then the first word of dialogue, Rosebud, that sets off this entire quest basically of people trying to figure out what does this mean. And then from there, we learn everything about this man's life, both from the perspective of the news that sensationalized Kane as this sort of godlike figure to the individuals that actually interact with him, where we see the rise and fall. And I think that's a great way to describe the film. It's the ultimate rise and fall story that I find really, really just is a captivating film. And it's also interesting that with the title as one of the greatest films ever made, it has an expectation that, oh, this is somehow even more important than it already is. Like, it's an important film, obviously, and it's a seriously toned film, but it's also, it's kind of fun too. The film has a lot of fun with it. There's this energy to the entire pace of the story, despite being 2 hours. And you see the tragedy too comes from the fact that you sense the youthfulness of the young Kane and how at the cost of power and greed, he just becomes this degraded, lonely, just narcissistic recluse. And the contrast between the youthful passion that the young Kane has when it comes to, he says, like, I think it would be fun to run a newspaper, like right from the start. He has this naivete to it, but then he later says, I want to make the New York Enquirer as important as the gas in that light. Like, he has a vision and he senses power, but he also wants to have it before the people. But then that also becomes later on sort of an excuse, just sort of like, oh yeah, I'm doing it for the people. But it's like, no, you're really doing this for yourself to fuel your ego. And that is the ultimate, I guess, cost of acquiring all this power. And I just find that from a character study perspective, this is one of the greats in that regard. Removed from this being considered one of the best films ever, if it didn't have that title, I think the film would still work and be, in my eyes, a really incredible story on that alone.
Yeah, and I guess like the thing that, I'm back to the script and its structure, is that the film is laid out perfectly. You sort of have this, the film sort of tells it from the perspective of a journalist just trying to get down to the meaning of the last words, Rosebud. And, it's sort of like becoming into like this whole investigative journalist topic, which fits in very well because, of course, like the main character is a newspaper mogul, and in the same way that Randolph Hearst was. Even to the point where now that the Hearst newspaper companies technically are not longer a monopoly. They still own a lot of fair share publications here in the States, but now they're pretty much their own brand in some cases. But now it's like, but regardless, it's told through this perspective. You're sort of getting an idea of like who this character is, but you're still not getting a gist of like, okay, what is the meaning behind these last words? And it becomes like a really phenomenal character study in that way, because it's easy to digest. It's easy to gather these perspectives on Charles Foster Kane himself. And and while it's spoon feeding it to you in some respects, it's also adding in a lot of that commentary about, loneliness and about power and greed and like how that all sort of deteriorates your humanity. And I guess that's what makes this film really impressive, just because it's just so well written. And you don't really get a film. I mean, there probably were films like this at the time, but like, I don't know if you ever got one like this in the way that it's told. And I think a lot of that is also due to the editing from Robert Wise. Like, holy.
Oh, yeah.
How is this edited?
The director of Sound of Music.
Yeah, director of Sound of Music. Not a lot of people know that, oddly enough. But yeah, he was an editor on this film before he went into directing. And it's crazy on how this film transitions from one scene to the other. You get a lot of good match cuts. You get a lot of like impressive like crossfades, especially like the one edit where you're bumping into Kane's second wife, Susan, in the bar, and you're going through this translucent window, which, obviously it's expertly shot by, of course, Greg Toland. But just the way it transitions through that window is impressive. And then another impressive edit, too, this is actually my first time catching upon this edit as well, is Toland is zooming into this, like, photo of, like, all these businessmen. And as he zooms in, Orson Welles just walk through the image, like across, like as like the image is getting taken. Like that is an impressive edit. I mean, this is like not Wong Kar-wai. This is Park Chan-wook level of editing. Like it's crazy, like how well this film's edited, especially for 1941. Like, yeah, it's impressive. Like, just the way this film is structured, it's like this is the ultimate mise en scène. Like just everything working as a machine, as a component, just to create this really like engaging and enticing character study.
Yeah.
And
there's sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, so there's two things about that I want to bring up that you kind of allude to. Is like one, regard to the script, is that it doesn't necessarily hold your hand in the same way that so many other films of the era do, because as the characters in the film are trying to piece together what does Rosebud mean, so are we, because we as the audience, we don't know who Charles Foster Kane is. So the opening newsreel tries to paint a picture of everything, but it's missing out so many details, because we're only seeing the success of Kane as this valiant figure of conglomerates and economics and business, whereas what are the humble beginnings? How did this man grow up, I guess, and how did he meet these other women, and how does that change their lives too? And the theme of the puzzle is very much prominent in the film too, is that it keeps adding more and more pieces to this greater picture, but it's still not solved, because when Kane dies, it's at such a low point of his life where I guess he has accomplished everything, but he's lost literally everything else in the process, where he has nothing despite gaining so much. And that is probably the greatest mystery of them all. And the fact that even still by the end of the film, spoiler for this, was it almost 90-year-old film, we do find out what the meaning of Rosebud is, but there's still so many questions that are going through your head. And for the time, this was probably incredibly, not experimental, but this was probably mind-blowing. But even when I saw this when I was in high school, it was like, I like how this film is making me think. It's making me engage with the characters and just this overall mystery. But to also go to the mise en scène and the editing, one of the big things that made Citizen Kane developed such a reputation as one of the greatest films was the mise en scène. And I actually went back to some of my notes from when I was in school, but one of the the recognition of the film, it grew specifically from French critics like Andre Bazin, and Bazin in particular, he loved the film because of the mise en scène that countered the Soviet montage theory, because Citizen Kane uses a lot of cinematic techniques that you could only do in the medium, but it still tells a fairly grounded story where that's being informed to, I guess, push the narrative forward. And he cited Citizen Kane as cinema being an example, as cinema being art, in the same way that a book or a painting would, where you can read into it. You can look at all the details that the author or the filmmaker, in this case, put in to try and create a bigger picture. So it's thanks to him that Citizen Kane has developed such a is now in high regard. But no, I agree that one other thing too is just with Greg Toland's cinematography is the use of deep focus in the film. Like the depth of field in this film is just fantastic. I love the shot when it shows young Kane playing in the snow, and then within the boarding house are his parents talking about, I guess, like shifting the guardianship, and the entire conversation you see Kane playing outside in the snow through the window, whereas he has this omnipresence in the scene too. And that's just pure filmmaking right there. It's so, by nowadays what we see, it's pretty simple, I guess, but for the time, putting into consideration just how the composition is done and how that you could turn off the sound and still get an idea of what's happening in the scene. That just shows the craft that Orson Welles had on display in this film that proved to be so influential.
Yeah, and it's also the production design too, I think, especially the production design of Xanadu and how it's like this giant, like, behemoth of a house, which in turn was based off of Hearst Castle, where, Randolph Hearst lived. Like, if you know the history of Citizen Kane and Randolph Hearst, like, this film is purely like near not like autobiographical on Hearst, but it's almost feeling like it's autobiographical on Hearst. Like, it's insane just the level of like detail that is put into this, but the production design is just immaculate, especially like in the Xanadu like location. You feel the size of this thing, especially the distance of how it's where Susan is doing a puzzle, and then citizen like Charles Foster Kane is on like the other side of the room asking her a question, and you feel that echo just reverberate, and it fits so well because it just shows how like disconnected this character truly is, and how big his own hubris is, and also in case like how like very empty his whole life is. Like he's only seeing things for the face value as it is, and wanting that power, wanting that success, but sort of like the production design sort of emphasizing how empty it all feels, and how this materialism sort of adds into that emptiness really shines through here on the production design and the use of props. I especially like the design of the Inquirer as like the film goes on, where you sort of start to see how like a big of a mess this place is, and and how distant everything sort of feels, especially in the scene where he's firing Leland, played by Joseph Cotton, where you sort of feel this like distance between Leland and Kane as he's getting fired, and having like the gate in between them, but it's looking so far away, is just an incredible use of production design here. Like everything in this film is just like clicking the right way, and it's insane like how meticulous this is. And we haven't even tapped on Orson Welles, like his performance in this film either. There's a reason why he's like one of the most like celebrated actors out there. Of course, like his voice is very like iconic. I mean, I think everybody knows like when he was doing a ADR for this commercial in the 80s, and him just cussing out the writers as he's reading these lines. is pretty infamous, but regardless, his voice obviously very iconic, but just the way he just sort of acts in this film is just incredible. Like, it's very cold, it's very, you know, commanding. It's like, you know, it's very dry in some cases, but you're sort of seeing like the human layers come out of this character and just, but also kind of get shoved back in as we sort of started to see like how very sad and empty this individual is. It's really impressive acting.
With Wells's performance too, I really like his voice, and obviously with a radio background, he has a good voice, and you buy him as the character. But the scenes where he just stares and communicates so much is really, really impressive, especially when he's the older Kane. And I think the best illustration of that is when he funds, I guess, Susan's opera career, and she's not a good opera singer. And during her her first performance, just the audience is just not into it. You could tell, and the applause when they start applauding, and the applause just sort of dies down, and Kane forcefully tries to get the applause to keep it going, but that entire scene, just in his eyes, like you can kind of see too that he knows that deep down inside that Susan is not great at singing, but he poured all this money into this career, and like he thinks his own livelihood or his reputation is online, but it's more Susan that gets the real short end of the stick in this situation. But yet you just see his soul just sort of go away in that moment. That's the moment when you realize like what happened to this man that we saw earlier in the film, who was so passionate and like lively about going into this newspaper business, and then he's reduced to this. Like that's probably one of the best things about Wells' performance. And I forget the actress's name, but the actress who played Susan, I think is also absolutely fantastic. Like just the way she kind of breaks at points, and just you sense the frustration. And in the one scene when she's doing the jigsaw puzzle, I adore just how condescending she is to Kane. Just like, well, I want to go to New York and it's 11:30. Everyone's having fun. They're getting out of the musicals. Like, I want to have fun too. Like that, you sense just how loveless and just cold this marriage has become too. And she sells it really well. I think there's Wells is probably, he often gets associated as probably the strongest performance, but like, I don't know, every time I rewatch it, I'm just really impressed with the actress who plays Susan.
Yeah, her name is Dorothy Commingore. I know she was like I said, a lot of this cast is from the Mercury Productions.
The Mercury Theater.
Yeah, the Mercury Theater, which, you know, at the time was like, you know, one of the bigger radio businesses, which, you know, people wanted to get Orson Welles into Hollywood. And then, of course, after like War of the Worlds, the whole World of the Worlds fiasco happened, which, you know, it's pretty insane when you have to like how they just didn't have a preface for that whole situation where it's like, oh, yeah, you're going to be listening to War of the Worlds, but nope, you're listening to the opening prologue of the book and people are losing their shit out in the street. So
they thought real aliens were invading.
Yeah, for sure. I still laugh at the fact that even happened, but you know, but oddly enough, that sort of did play in part in how Orson Welles, like, you know, became such an iconic name too. But yeah, it's so like you know, like all the acting here is really good. I mean, I think Welles like definitely is like, you know, the biggest name here, but I think everybody else is, you know, is just as good here. I mean, Joseph Cotton as Leland is very believable. I especially love him as like the older version of Leland, and, you know, sort of being a little bit jokey. Like it adds a little bit of levity to the film, a little bit that is mostly serious. So I mean, it's a really good cast all around. But I also really love Ruth Warwick, who plays Emily Kane's first wife. Like she does a very good job, like sort of portraying that coldness that, you know, is associated with the the Citizen Kane character in a lot of ways. I especially love the scene where, they inevitably separate and, it's like she's downright serious. And it's like you really start to feel like, yeah, even she's sort of affected by like his whole bravado in some way, even though she is sort of grows up as like this life of luxury. I mean, she's a niece of the president of the United States, like, so it made sense, like, why those two are sort of a couple, but you sort of realize like how cold the relationship is, especially in the one scene where they're both at the dinner table and it's where the editing,
yeah, that little montage.
Yeah, the montage, and it's where the editing just really works. Here is like you're sort of given the gist about, thinking like, oh, okay, this table's probably still the same size. Like you don't even think about the table in the scene. You just sort of see how that relationship starts to deteriorate. But then as it like ends and then the camera pans out and you see how much bigger the table has gotten, like that is just an excellent like visual metaphor in a lot of ways. Like it's amazing, like, how creative this film really is, and just how it uses like everything. But yeah, I mean, like everybody here is just so amazing. Like it's really hard not to come away with like a bad performance.
Yeah, and like creative, but also considering that this was still the 4D studio system, just how they had to work around limitations to achieve this vision. Like one thing that we didn't mention about the production design that a lot of people mention is that there's attention paid to how all the sets have ceilings on them. Like not only adding to the realism, but to get around that, they literally had to cut holes into the set floor to get some of these angles where Wells is purposely being like, hey, look at the ceiling. There's no lights on there. Like this is a real environment. And so it's stuff that you don't really think about nowadays because we're so used to we have smaller cameras. We can get really creative angles, but these are massive 35 millimeter film cameras that require a lot of light and you got to reload them. And just the amount of effort that went into achieving the vision makes it all the more impressive too. And also with the use of the matte shots as well, the matte paintings, how that also plays into the deep focus. Like I love the one shot of the medicine cup next to Susan's bed after the opera performance, where just the illusion of depth is really, really good in that scene. And that's a matte shot, and you wouldn't even consider that because you think of matte paintings of like, oh, a grand sunrise or a mountain or something. But no, it's just a household item. But to get that angle, you have to problem solve. You got to think around it, and you sense that not only did Wells know what he was doing, but clearly RKO, the studio, just let him do whatever. And having that confidence in the filmmaker is really what made the film so special. And even to one like little things like the random bird jump scare towards the end of the film, that's just Wells being like, he literally just did whatever. He didn't care. Like, and the story goes that he put that in because I guess he probably assumed people were going to be kind of dozing off or tired by that point. So he had that to like wake them up or something. Like he was a prankster at the same time. So I love that.
We need to have more birds in very long movies. I wouldn't mind
if Project Hail Mary had a bird jump scare.
Yep. Just a bird flying across space. Like, hey, I'll take it. I mean, we need more of that. Like, wake up. Movie's not over yet.
Yeah.
It's funny. The movie's not even that long. It's like it hits like exactly 2 hours, oddly enough.
But it doesn't feel like that. It feels like an hour long.
Yeah.
Like,
that's like just how meticulous, like, this film is just crafted. And, it's really interesting on just the level of like the amount of history and the amount of innovation this film truly had. Because now you like I said, like there was film before Citizen Kane, and you get film after Citizen Kane. It's like I don't think film would be the same after it, and obviously it took a few years for it to get the reputation it did. So as I mentioned before, when the film came out, Randolph Hearst, like, you know, obviously.
Oh, he loved it.
Oh, yeah, he loved it. In the same way Trump loved The Apprentice. You know, so obviously Hearst hated it. I don't know if he actually saw it. I'm just trying to read up a little bit, but he apparently, like, you know, got a hold of a article about it that was comparing Charles Foster Kane to Randolph Hearst, which, you know, you got to think, like, yeah, there was obviously a lot of deliberation there in terms of how Mankiewicz wrote the script. And so, and this was a pretty big thing at the time. And luckily, this doesn't happen nowadays. All you just do is you just get edgelords on Twitter and Rotten Tomatoes review bombing IMDb to say that this is actually a bad movie because I disagree with it. But initially, like, he started to release a whole bunch of, like, newspapers, like, just lampooning Citizen Kane. Which is funny because
ironic that but the character of Kane in the film does similar things but in a more positive light for Susan's reviews, so it's like life imitated art and vice versa.
Well, yeah, and he also it's like funny, like they actually predicted it in the film, like, and not with just that, but it's also the scene where they're making the newspaper article about the whole affair that Kane's is having. And then it's like, you know, I guess we're just going to have to release this one. And it's just saying that Getty's a fraud. So it's like, it did predict that, you know, Hearst was going to probably have some sort of backlash against this film. And so it impacted the film's box office at the end of the day. And, you know, the film did get nominated for Best Picture and a whole bunch of Oscars, and completely lost in almost every category outside of Best Original Screenplay.
What won cinematography that year? What was better than Citizen Kane for cinematography?
I believe it was
that's an insane snub.
I believe it was How Green Was My Valley. Like, that was the. I'm just gonna pull it up here real quick, but, you know, it's the Robert Ford film or John Ford film.
Admittedly, I've never seen it, so
I haven't either. I know our good friend Dana Rory said, like, it's a good film. You know, I got to see it myself first. So I mean, maybe a future episode, but yeah. So, you know, it was nominated for a whole bunch of Oscars. It only won one. Mankiewicz didn't actually. I believe Mankiewicz didn't get that Oscar until much later, because it was only awarded to Wells, oddly enough. But, you know, like you said, what happened is, like, once the Bazan article came out, it, you know, eventually it hit its reputation. Like, you know, people started to really adore the film back then. And, you know, it's still adored now. So, yeah, it was awarded to How Green Was My Valley. Okay. Like, yeah, it's insane the amount of categories this film lost in. I mean, I haven't seen any of the other films nominated because holy crap, they nominated a lot of films back in the day for one category, guys.
Yeah.
Like, there's like 12 nominees for Best Cinematography, black and white. Like, that is insane. But regardless, you know, the film, it took a while for the film to get the reputation it did. And now, but luckily nowadays, like, you know, ever since, like, you know, we have defamation and libel suits now because, you know, I mean, and yeah, you still get tabloid magazines that still do stuff like this, like that you come across in the grocery store every now and again. But regardless, like, you know, it still, like, had an influence over, like, the journalism industry in some respects, because now we can't, like, we're not allowed to do those type of, like, articles anymore. I mean, and that's also why we have, like, review embargoes too.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. Because, you know, bad
so we
word.
can thank Hearst for that.
So. Yeah. Thank Hearst. Like, you know, the dude really lived up to the reputation that the film Citizen Kane, like, put there. And so, but yeah, he really attempted to, like, you know, hurt the film's reputation. And then now, you know, the film's reputation is much more greater than he is, which is insane. Yeah. But I mean, it's impressive. Like, it's really impressive. There is one issue though in the film.
What's the issue?
Yeah, people have talked about it. I could see why there could be people that have, like, stated it. And it's a big, big plot hole. A really huge plot hole. You see where I'm getting at.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're already in spoilers anyway. So, initially, of course the film centers around this whole idea of, like, these people trying to figure out what the meaning behind his last words were, being Rosebud. As a whole, it's like told very beautifully. Like, it's told very beautifully, and the realization of how what Rosebud really meant is really amazing. I actually think it really works very well. I think Rosebud as a theme, as sort of just like, a loss of, like, humanity, a loss of innocence. Because, Rosebud is essentially his sled. It reminds, him as a kid initially, but they just threw it away. So it's like, initially it's just showing, like, a huge loss of innocence, a loss of humanity in this character. That's great. But there is one certain plot hole that does kill the film. And that is the fact that nobody was in the room when he said that word. It's one of the most nitpicky plot holes that people say deters the film a lot. Which, when you think about it, I wouldn't say it does. But it does sort of make you think, like, yeah, that's probably one detail that Wells or Mankiewicz missed initially. Doesn't mean that the film is bad. I like how people try to use that as, like, a launching pad to say, oh, it's a bad movie now because nobody was in the room where it happened.
What a hack, Orson Welles.
Yeah. Like, what a hack. It's like, yeah, it's like, why is this guy saying he was in the room? He wasn't in the room. What are you talking about? So, I almost made a Hamilton reference there, in the room where it happened. And I just did. Broadway fans unite. Anyway, but yeah, that is a big glaring plot hole that I don't know if you can really try to justify there was a way to, like, make it work. Like, there could have been maybe an indication that the butler was in the room, because, from our perspective, we only see somebody into the room after he says the words, unless he whispered Rosebud very loudly. So, I mean, he must have had a lot of projection to say that. He just said Rosebud. I better check it out. But, I don't think that deters the film.
However, I realized that when watching the film again, when Kane discovers the snow globe when he's destroying Susan's room, he says Rosebud, and we see the cut, when it cuts back, there's like 20 people, like his staff, I guess, that are watching. And we see him walk away, and we presume that he just goes into his room and then dies. So maybe how many people know that his last word was Rosebud, it could have been from any of them, because for all we know, that was the last time they saw Kane alive. So I understand why people say that this is a plot hole, but in my opinion, it really isn't that much of a plot hole, because there's 3 other ways where people know that was his last word, but maybe not in the order that we perceive it. Because technically, canonically, what we see in the film, him dropping the snow globe at the opening, yeah, that's his last word. But he also said it before he left Susan's room when the 20 other people heard him say it. And my headcanon is that, okay, that was the last thing they heard Kane said as well.
Yeah, and, I think that's a point people miss a lot. I think it's because, and I guess, like, it sort of works in a way like Amadeus from Milos Forman. Great film. Definitely should talk about it.
Excellent film.
Definitely should talk about it someday. But it sort of like works in a way where we're seeing it from the perspective of a journalist. And so initially we're not really seeing it from the perspective of Kane himself. Because at the point the film begins, he is dead. Like, he's already gone. He's already passed away. So we are sort of at a point where it's like, the film's already established that perspective. So we're only seeing it from the perspectives of, the people he knew and the journalists. So, and I guess like how I interpret the opening scene, when I was a kid, when I was 13 years old, when I saw it for the first time, how I interpret it from the opening scene was that we are sort of seeing it from Kane's perspective. And that's probably the only time we ever see anything from Kane's perspective. Because we only see things from the perspective of the butler, of Susan, of Leland, of his other best friend. Forgot his name. But you only see it from the perspective of other characters who knew him. So I think it's interesting that the film, and I think that sort of helps the film in this way, because it actually, it doesn't, for people who just have face value, oh, it's an obvious plot hole there, but it's in a case, it somehow isn't, because we only see it from the perspective of these people. So they saw him say Rosebud for the last time in their way, but they obviously weren't in the room, where he inevitably passed away. So I think that does sort of fill up the plot hole in there. So
I've always read people say that this is such a big plot hole, but I always found it confusing because as I've pointed out, there were multiple, I guess, counter arguments to that, where it's this really isn't a plot hole. If we saw the same movie, I assume that's what I'm curious. When people bring this up, I know people also say the same thing about the Lord of the Rings movies, how the eagles they say oh, why don't they just fly on the eagles to Mount Doom to drop the ring? And it's okay, there's so many other steps to get to that process too, but it's every movie has these little nitpicky plot holes that you could point out. If you want to talk about plot hole, or not plot hole, but a super minor nitpick that in no way destroys the film, but I always found very humorous about Citizen Kane, it's during the party scene when they're singing the song and they have all the girls come out. The one girl on the very right so clearly misses the lyric in the song, and it's very, once you see it, you just can't not see it. And it's very funny that out of everyone, the one who's in the very front totally flubs the song. So
it's like the stormtrooper in Star Wars who hits his head on the ceiling.
At least that's in the background though. But
at least
this
it
is front and center.
Yeah.
So
1
out of 10.
Yeah, 1 out of 10. Very, very bad.
Orson Welles is a hack fraud.
I guess this is also one of the first films to use marketing in a different way. So
the trailer.
Yeah, the trailer was a pretty interesting thing, because I know Hitchcock had not the same approach for when he was promoting Psycho back in 1963, but the trailer is just sort of they're talking about this film. They're talking about that all these actors came from the Mercury Arts radio shows. And it's as a marketing standpoint, it's actually pretty impressive. Because, nowadays we just to see edited clips can splice together in one full trailer for 2 to 3 minutes. But with this, it was just we don't even see clips of the film. We just see the clips of the process and the actors and the film. And it's pretty amazing that they marketed the film this way. Like, I kind of wish we could see more of that in some respects. I mean, I guess we sort of did what they had, that Crime 101 movie with Hemsworth that came out. I've never seen it, but they sort of tried to like, oh, this is an action spectacle. So yeah, just sort of doing that in some way.
Well, it also plays into the idea of, I remember I watched that trailer and I really like how it plays into Wells's, at the time, he was more known for being a radio personality. So you hear his voice, but you never see him on screen. But it also reinforces the auteur theory where, as the director, he has this presence over every facet of the film production. And that right from the start, he's sort of telling us like, yeah, this is my film and I'm going to do it this way. You're going to see something that you probably haven't seen before. So I find it just it's really interesting to see him plant the seeds that early, even in the marketing, where it's like, I'm sure for an audience, they'll be like, what an interesting film this might be. That guy, Orson Welles, he's going to do something really cool. So,
yeah. And you probably have to think like that. They're like building up the fact of the appearance of Orson Welles in this film too. Because like, you know, for the most part, like nobody knew what Orson Welles looked like at the time. I mean, there probably were like press photos and stuff like that, but like, oh, I never get to see this guy act like, you know, on screen, not just over the ear, not just like an audiobook. So you're probably thinking where at this point where it's like, you're going to get to see like probably one of the biggest names on the big screen who doesn't really have a face to a name for a lot of people. So it's really impressive that they marketed it this way. I mean, obviously it didn't really help its box office at the end of the day because obviously, you know, Hearst was a pissy bitch during this film. Like during the press junket of this film, like, I'm glad that, you know, we are avoiding that we don't have anybody. I don't know. We still sort of do. It's in the form of three circles. But anyway, you know, we're still, you know, it's good that we don't have anybody like Hearst out there in this way, at least. Sort of. But, but yeah, I mean.
I did read that this is one of Trump's favorite films.
Yeah, it's very, very crazy. It's very crazy. And it's also insane, like, how that makes it oddly enough relevant. I mean, obviously, regardless of what you like think about DT or whatever, it is sort of an emblematic image in some way that I think a lot of people like noticed.
The parallels.
Yeah. It parallels very interestingly, and I think you could really parallel it with anybody. I mean, I think obviously you have good examples of like, you know, Zuckerberg and, you know, obviously the social network is probably, you know, about the same way that Citizen Kane was for Randolph Hearst. You could think about it in Musk. You could see it in Bezos. You could see it in a lot of billionaires that, you know, probably live these like really extravagant, like, you know, lifestyles. But, you know, at the end of the day, probably have a life of complete emptiness, you know? I mean, and obviously, like, yeah, we don't know what these guys are like outside of, like, you know, the public eye. But at the end of the day, it is a very interesting look at, like, you know, what money itself and what greed it is, like, you know, sort of how it, you know, sort of makes you feel like this empty shell of yourself. And I think that's what makes this film, like, you know, relevant. Because, you know, we see this all the time with, like, you know, capitalistic billionaires and media moguls out there. Like, and, you know, we always, like, wonder, like, what goes on behind those closed doors. So I think it is a very impressive. It's impressive that it manages to still stay relevant. I mean, I think that's why, you know, the film's able to, like, live on that well in the modern era. So,
yeah, and even just removing the canon, it's just a great movie. Mm-hmm. Like, just any way you look at it, it's just really, really solid. So,
yeah, very much so. I mean, I don't know. I think we pretty much reiterated what everybody else has been talking about. with this film.
But it's hard not to, but that's also part of the appeal too. So
yeah, it's like, you know, I don't know if you have you ever heard of Mike the Snare at all? He's a music YouTuber. He's actually based out of Connecticut, but so he does these things called deep discog dives, where he, you know, dives into the career and discography of a artist. And he did one on the Beatles like about 5 years ago, and it was like an hour long, but it's actually very interesting, like history dissection of their discography. But in his like final thoughts, he sort of mentions Citizen Kane, and sort of like, you know, comparing it to the Beatles in respects where, you know, it's a film that is endlessly talked about and is endlessly, like, you know, talked about to death. But its influence looms large over the genre. And, you know, and he sort of like uses that in a way to say that, you know, the Beatles did the same thing in music. And, you know, I know my family is probably turning this off because they probably hate hearing me talk about about the Beatles. But regardless of whether you love or hate this film, its influence like looms very large over the genre of filmmaking. Like in any respect, I think even if there are films out there that are not directly influenced by it, there are probably the films that probably influenced those filmmakers were probably in turn influenced by Citizen Kane. Like, it all sort of connects back in some way. And yeah, sure, there could be examples like, you know, there's probably a lot of like, you know, international filmmakers that are not influenced by Citizen Kane in the same way that us in the US are. Like, you know, there's probably a lot of, you know, Japanese filmmakers that are probably more influenced by Kurosawa than Orson Welles. But I think it all sort of still cuts back in a way like showing how influential a film could really be. And, you know, and yeah, this film certainly has that influence. It has the Beatles level influence on it, where it's talked about to death. People talk about it all the time, but there's reasons why. There's a reason why. So, I mean, but yeah, I think that's like how I sort of see the film. So, but I guess since we're getting into it, final thoughts.
Yeah, it is one of the greats, and it's hard to add something new to the conversation, but I think the Beatles analogy is really, really clever because at that point when a film reaches this level of prestige and recognition, it's not so much what new could be added, it's more why do we appreciate it in this to this degree? Why do we consider this film one of the greats? And I think rewatching it and having this conversation, it does remind me of why this film left such a big impact on future filmmaking and inspired so many other filmmakers in the generations onward, and why it's still being taught in film schools. And it's sometimes like the butt of a joke, or it's often parodied, but it's out of love and respect. It's not out of ridicule. Like, no one's going to come, unless you're just like the biggest contrarian or like internet edgelord. Like, it's unlikely that you're going to come out of this being like, oh yeah, that movie was absolute trash. But it's like, even if you're not really into older films, there's something here that I think you will find either engaging or you'll come out appreciating it. And removed from it being in film history books, it is just, it's such a great film overall. And I've loved it more and more every time I've seen it. So it's an easy 10 out of 10. I know it's like, no, 1 out of 10 actually. This film was trash. No, it's a masterpiece. Yeah, 10. So
yeah. You know what? I'm gonna edge for it. It's gonna be a 1 out of 10. I mean, there's
room for improvement.
Yeah, there's a lot of room for improvement. I mean, my God, does anybody listen to
black and white? Ew.
Yeah, does anybody listen to Peruvian death metal? That's one of my favorite genres. Okay, I'm obviously being very silly, but yeah, I mean, what else can you really say about it that hasn't already been said? And because it's hard to imagine filmmaking without this. And yeah, of course, you had a lot of films like before this that left just as big as in a cultural footprint as this did. I mean, Casablanca, no, that was after. No, you had Gone with the Wind, of course. You had Wizard of Oz. You had, Fantasia. You had a lot of those very big films before then. But once Citizen Kane became such a big deal, and of course, the whole counterculture started to hit after Bazan's writing of this film, it's like it's hard to imagine modern filmmaking without this film. I could see so much of Park Chan-wook using these style of edits that Citizen Kane did, even if he wasn't directly influenced by them. I could see that there's probably a lot of actors nowadays that are influenced by the way Orson Welles acted, wrote, and starred and produced in this thing. I mean, obviously, big people that come to mind are, Ben Affleck, of course, and Greta Gerwig. There's probably a lot of people, even if they're not directly influenced by it, are like, hey, we could run the whole gamut of being this sort of Renaissance man in some sense, or a Renaissance person. And so it's really hard not to see the influence in modern filmmaking without this film. You can't really talk about film without talking about this. And yeah, it's been talked about to death. It's been taught to death. I mean, it's a full understanding of there's probably people that are sick of hearing the name Citizen Kane. But there is good reason. It's very innovative. It's very special for this time period. It's one of those films that, has certainly left a stamp on modern cinema and is oddly enough still relevant to what's going on in our current society. Even if we don't love or hate those people, there probably could be a case where this story really does connect in a lot of ways. But regardless of the cultural context and regardless of the impact on its own, it's still a very amazing film. I mean, the script is so tight, it's so concise, the perspective is great. Of course, the acting from Wells is amazing. I mean, it's just, what can you really say about this film that hasn't already been said? It's a pure masterpiece. Definitely a 10 out of 10. Apologies to those edgelords and contrarians that are trying to say otherwise, but you can't really go to hate these films. So,
yeah, I'm glad I got to see it again, even in the context of it being outside of a film class, because just to watch it as a form of what a film mostly is entertainment, it still really works, even in that regard too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's nice to come back to a classic after a long time, and I told you I got the box set, the 40th anniversary box set. It comes with prints of not prints, but a book of the storyboards and stuff.
Oh, nice.
Pretty amazing. Also comes with the TV film where Liev Schreiber, oddly enough, portrayed Orson.
Was it RKO 251?
Yeah, or RKO 251. It's sort of about the production of Citizen Kane, and then of course, you had Mank that came out, 5 years ago. That was based off of Pauline Kael's, piece on the authorship of the story. But yeah, I mean, it's still definitely a film that's going to be in my collection for a long time. So I know, you said, the Criterion is sort of hit or miss, the packaging, or
the packaging's kind of silly, but it looks really nice. Actually, we didn't talk about this, but this was the first Criterion release. It was their first Laserdisc, and it was also, I think it was either this or King Kong. It was the first film to have a commentary track on its release.
Oh, so, shit, damn.
Yeah, there's that, and then this is just another like factoid. The brilliant studio executive Ted Turner, he wanted to colorize the film. And obviously people were not happy about that because why would you want to colorize Citizen Kane of all movies? The black and white cinematography is what adds so much to the mood and tone. But because of the outcry from filmmakers, that's why we have the National Film Preservation Board. So we have Ted Turner's idiocy to thank for the National Preservation Board that preserves films. So,
yep. Thank you, Ted. I really appreciate that your idiotic mistake helped preserve physical media. And thank you, Criterion. Physical media matters, guys.
Yes, it does.
It does. I mean, I got to grow my collection.
Yeah, despite the silly packaging on the Criterion release, still buy it, though, because it's better than owning a digital file on your laptop.
Yeah, just watch for the next Criterion flash sale because these are expensive. So, but regardless, support physical media. We need it. All right, I believe it's your turn.
Yeah. So I actually I was thinking about it off and on. I was like, oh, what should I do? And spoilers for the next episode, we're going to be talking about the Super Mario Galaxy movie, which I'm sure we're going to have a lovely, lovely time with that.
Oh, boy.
But to get into the mood and spirit, I thought I would follow the trend of pairing this new film that we're going to see with a predecessor. And obviously worthy of Citizen Kane, too, following up. But my recommendation is Super Mario Brothers 1993, the first video game film adaptation.
Oh, bro. Oh, man.
We've been talking about too much good stuff.
Yeah, we've been talking about too much good stuff. Now it's time to dig through a bowl of shit. I mean, figuring out that last name of Mario is Mario.
Oh, that's right. It's been by the way, I've seen the film before, but it's been a long time. So
yeah, we have to bootleg it, right? Because they haven't officially digitized it or whatever.
We'll find a way.
But if you don't want to be spoiled for the next episode as we talk about the Super Mario Brothers movie, 1993 to be exact, you could try to watch the film before our next episode anywhere you can. Obviously, the film is not available on any physical format, so the Internet Archive is going to be your best friend. And of course, we have an Instagram, we have a Letterboxd, and we have a Twitter, so go ahead and follow us on there. And if you're listening to on YouTube, please like and subscribe, and please hit the bell icon or whatever Logan Paul says after each of the end of his videos, as long as it has nothing to do with a Japanese forest. But regardless, I've been I've been Daniel.
I've been Matthew.
And I hope you guys have a good rest of your week.
Rosebud.